Well, from punching cows, I learned to be a journeyman machinist. And that's what I always wanted to do. But I learned to run big machineries, big lathes, big boring mills, milling machines. I took a world of information away with me, skilled, which I'm still thankful for. I feel like I still owe the railroad something. They gave me a trade. That's about all I know. I remember I took enough of trade with me that I made a living the rest of it, till now. A lot of friends were here. And after I went into the publishing company, a lot of these old machinists come there to work for me. And lots of nice guys were here. If they were still alive, I'd still be friends with them. That's Homer Rainey. He was an electrician foreman. And before I come to work here, I'd learned to be a taxidermist on the ranch through the mail. That's kind of a poor way to start, but that's the way I started. I was working up here at the New Mexico Fur Company, and he was a hunter, and he had heads up there, and got acquainted with him. He was a nice guy, him and his wife. And just before June that year, 1940, I got the work caught up there. I was going to be out of a job. So he said, I can get you on to railroad shops. So I grabbed it, you know. Then he helped me all through the shops, because I was right out of the hills, and they cussed a lot here in the shops. And so a big old guy waved his arms at me for something I didn't do or something. Pretty soon, Homer would be here talking out of the side of his mouth. Don't pay attention to that, he said. That's just their way. They don't mean nothing by it. He helped me stay. So I've always felt like I owed him. He's dead now, but I went to see him just before he died in Cleveland. That's where they transferred him. And when I left, they said he turned his face to the wall and died.
We keep up with his wife's still alive, and we still keep up with her.
When I got an apprenticeship, it was a great feeling. I was going to get to run the machines that I had always wanted to run. I used to sweep around them, and I know I could do that, but didn't get to till I got to be an apprentice. And the apprentice instructors were real nice. They'd come and stand by your machine and talk, and discuss the work. They was real nice guys.
He had to work all day, every day, and then twice a week he had to go in to take this apprenticeship, and so that was in addition to his regular. I mean, this was just a privilege to get to do that. You didn't get paid, you just had to do that extra.
Well, when I get the apprenticeship, it was a great step forward, because I could see that I may make it someday, you know.
Well, I was real happy that he was going forward, and at that time we didn't know what he might be in the railroad the rest of his life. We didn't know what the world held at that time, and because that was the main employment in Albuquerque, why at that time I figured he'd be here the rest of his life. When Jay had to start working nights, it was difficult because we lived quite a ways out, and we just had one car, and our children were small, and but we were still thankful that he had a job that made us a living, but night work isn't a fun thing at all. Not for the wife or the worker either. We got up real early, and I fixed him a sack lunch, and in those days they had a little place down close to the railroad shops,
right across the street,
where they served a meal on a certain day, and you could get all you wanted to eat. And how much did you pay for that?
Not very much, $1 or $2.
Just probably $1.
They always had all the beans you could eat, all the homemade bread you could eat, and one piece of meat.
But the rest of the time he carried his lunchbox, and I still have his lunchbox. And it had a thermos in the top, so it's pretty well wore out now. But that's the way he ate all the time, was he took a lunch. And he's glad to be home now after all these years of work. Well, I didn't see him in the day very often. In the evening, if I kept the car that day, I would meet him, and it was on, what is the name of that street?
First Street.
First Street, and
right out here, First and Second.
And I knew which gate he came out, so I parked the car there and waited for him. And but I just kept the car about once a week. Most of the time I didn't. I was home without any transportation. But we had a telephone by this time, and so if I needed something real bad, why, I had friends that would come and help me. And the Rainey's by this time had moved out into our area, and she was a nurse, so she was helped me with my children when they were small, and that was a very good thing. But we had grown up in the country, so we didn't mind living out in the country at all. Well, I just knew it was noisy and huge. I didn't really know, because you see these windows were painted, but he told me, about the big machines that he worked on, and the big trains that came through, and of course we could see them out on the tracks. But the railroad was the main employment in the whole city of Albuquerque, and Albuquerque was 35,000 at that time. I always saw this place from the outside, and so this is the first time I've seen, and I didn't realize that these windows were all painted green until I was inside here today. And I didn't ever see these deep holes. I heard him talk about them, and
These are the pits.
The pits, and I didn't know what the pits were really until I see them today. But we could see them from the outside. Well, I think it's huge, and I'm thankful for it because it's got us where we are today. We could hear the whistle that blew clear out to where we lived, and that was about 5 miles
On 90th Street.
west of the bridge, and so we could hear the whistle blow clear out there. It was a loud whistle, and I guess everybody went where they went and come from that whistle because it was always right on time.
You know, the old engineers on those steam engines, they had a certain whistle. It's always nice to hear it.
After all these years, I had never been inside this building, but many times I waited on the outside to see my husband coming out with his lunchbox to meet me and go home. But this is the first time I've been inside of the building and seen what it looked like inside and seen the pits and the green color on the windows. It's a surprise. It looks bigger inside than it did outside. The whistle, that was when he had to go to work, and all the years he worked here, he never was late a day. But some men come tripsing in just as that whistle was blowing.
Whistle you're talking about came from the powerhouse right there. And that they blew a whistle 15 minutes before time to go to work. And when they blew the next one, you got up and went to work. That's what she's talking about. But what I was talking about was on the trains when they were coming in. Every wife that had a engineer husband, they'd know his whistle. They'd know he was coming in.
But that was a different job than what Jay had.
Yeah, just here, you could hear those old trains whistle.
Listen to that whistle out there now.
Well, in the wheel bay over there, when I worked as a machinist, they had certain axles that didn't take the wheels off of, big old lathes, and you just barely took a skim off of it, just little bitty shavings. Right next machine over there where they bored out the tires, was big old curls come off of there. So one day we got a bunch of those curls and put over at this machine, and the old foreman come along there, walking along, directly jumped about that high off the floor. Come back up there and he saw he'd been had, so he turned around and walked off. But those old big coils coming off there, that had taken too much off of that axle, Then when we was making the axles, me and George Maines was on the days. There's a big old bench and we'd take long cuts. At night especially, you'd get sleepy and you'd liable to doze. Just sure as you doze, somebody hit with a sledgehammer, hit that bench on the bottom. You'd jump and grab for the lathe, you thought something broke. Another time I laughed, over in the corner over here, there's an elevator. Right behind that elevator, the foreman couldn't see. An old guy got his hand hurt real bad, and he was carrying it, walking easy, And the guys got him in behind that elevator where the foreman couldn't see. They had sticks and stuff that hit in his hand, and it just scared him to death. So we got a lot of fun out of that. And sometimes the guys up, I guess, in the rafters would come up there with a paper sack full of water, get over a guy and drop it and just drown him, One time a guy was miking a piece real close, and it drip, drip, drip. It just, a lot of little things like that's funny, Foreman didn't like it too much, but it broke the monotony. Quite a few, but we had safety meetings every week, and they really stressed safety. Yeah, a lot of people got hurt. Some killed, but not a whole lot. But they just get hurt stupidly, But we had safety meetings every week, and we had to attend them. And it stressed safety, safety, safety. The old man who used to run this transfer table, I thought he'd killed himself one morning. He was coming in, there was ice all over everything. He was kind of crippled like I am now.
and he got slipped and turned upside down and hit his head off in that pit. We run down there and got him, but he kind of shook his head. We got him back up out of that, and he was all right. But we were thankful for that. Yeah, one time, those steam engines, they had a big old rod like that went under the boiler, and then straight had bearing surfaces out here. Had arms about that long on it. This old lathe that put it in is a very high thing. And it'd go around slow like that, and he'd machine those little surfaces on the ends. Well, he was fooling around there and had it running. You know, those old bib overalls. He wasn't watching what he was doing when those arms caught his overalls. It just took him up, took him around, and he started screaming. Took him around 2 or 3 times before somebody got it cut off. Didn't hurt him though. Accident, it could have killed him. Santa Fe Hospital. I don't remember that. Now they'd get them up there, just somebody, maybe a foreman, grab a car and take them, you know. If it was bad, they'd call an ambulance. I heard a story after I left. A guy I knew real well, a painter. I used to work in a paint shop here. Worked everywhere. But over in the other side of the pit here, there was a guy working in the work equipment, working on a crane. It had an arm, you know. And they had one of those tanks there, and he was painting on the tank. And the crane got loose and swung around and hit him. He was standing on and just hit him. He was hanging by his head, just flattened his head like that. Of course, he was dead, you know. But it come to me because I knew him. Nolasco was his name. He was part Indian, or maybe it was Indian, I don't know. But they told me about it. I don't remember anybody getting killed when I worked here except an old man in a Baja down in the lower yards. One night a car hit him. They'd make up a train, they'd push those cars downhill pretty fast, and they'd go on down and hook up, you know. This old guy was hooking air and stuff. He didn't hear that car coming and got him, rolled him under there and killed him. No, I wasn't worried about getting hurt. I just listened to the safety meetings, did what they said the best I could.
No, I didn't. The only people I knew that worked here was this man that got Jay the job and his wife, and that wasn't ever anything that we talked about. We talked about our own personal lives, and by this time I had the children, and then eventually, she had 2 children, and so we still keep up with them. No, I figured he could take care of himself. He's always been pretty careful, and he never did get into any trouble, and so life's been pretty smooth for us. Well, I didn't realize really how dangerous it was until now.
Coming back and seeing it like it is now, it's a shock, and it's real sad. I don't like it. Well, I didn't think I'd see this. It's just a bad shock. It's empty, the glasses are all broke, and it just, I don't know the words to use. It just, men all up, the way it used to be when I worked here, lots of men worked here. And you knew the biggest part of them, you know. And the engines, there's an engine sitting on every track just about, being empty once in a while. But right in those two tracks there was a pit like this. And an old Swiss guy by the name of Fritz, he was a foreman, but he's heavy, not too big, but heavy. And the old springs under the engine, on the axle, about that thick with leaves, and about that long. And the guys was waiting for a crane when they'd lift them. And old Fritz come along and saw him standing there, and he just went, got some of those springs, lifted them up, threw them in the pit, just mad. Those guys couldn't lift those springs, but he did. But there's a thing like that, kind of things you remember, When I first started my apprenticeship and I got on the machines, that pretty well impressed in my mind. Well, you was cutting steel and you had to work in thousands on a lot of it. And just precision work. I worked on them after the blacksmiths got through them. They'd take a piece of steel, and the blacksmiths would. They had air hammers. Those old rams come down. They wanted to hit it, they hit it, And, well, the men that worked here, what they did good. Had to. And like a machinist, the electricians, when an engine went out, the electricity had to work on it. Everything had to work. And there were lots of rods that went, and men that made those had to be right. Most of those rods had tapered pins in them. They went in there tight, And an old guy named Liebarger had a lathe that he pulled around each engine. And the guys that have the holes reamed already, he'd mark the holes and measure the holes, make those tapered pins. And he had a special hammer he used to hammer them in with. But that was pretty precision work. Had to trust them. Well, they had to do their job, and if they didn't do it, they wasn't here. They'd be fired. So maybe they had to trust you sometime. So it was just everybody worked together pretty well. Men that worked here were just common, ordinary men. There's a lot of them raised right here, a lot of them Spanish, a lot of gringos. And it was all the same. Spanish, Hispanic, or whatever you want to call them, and gringos, which they call us, they were all the same. We were all the same. That means you don't have a grudge against them because they're Hispanic. They don't have a grudge against you because you're gringo. And they both know their jobs, whatever the jobs is. They know them and they do them. Pretty well, I never saw a fight while I was in here. They all got along. Sometimes they didn't much like each other. They didn't let it affect their work.